Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Kim, and thank you, Achilles, and thank you to the Triennale and the Art and Culture Foundation. So my name is Martine d'Anglejean-Chatillon, and I'm extremely happy to be a moderator again. I was a moderator in Seoul, and I'm incredibly surprised that I've been asked back. I'm a former London gallerist, and now an agent for some remarkable artists, and also a producer. And we set about to generate really ambitious projects that a lot of people would think are impossible, I guess. So I've been in the trenches with artists for a very, very long time. And I really believe that working closely with them is an incredible source of a very kind of special intelligence. And with the kind of projects that we produce, in the best of cases for the moment, we find that they're on the opposite ends of the art market. So what we do is we work transversally, and we work in the worlds of cinema, fashion, gaming, technology, science, and academia. So when I was asked to participate in this conference, and I heard the theme of the conference, and the word together meant a lot to me, I thought I'd kind of reflect to try to tease out of that a sort of interesting way for you to kind of understand complex works of art and what they entail in terms of thinking together. And the vector by which I came to this is really a conversation I had a while back with the polymath, brilliant person, an incredible musician, Brian Eno. And he reminded me that in culture, we talk a lot about the word genius. And often too casually, we talk about genius. And he found this problematic. So he introduced to me this new notion, which is the notion of socius. And he coined the term to challenge the traditional notion of the solitary genius. And his concept emphasizes the collaborative and interconnected nature of creativity. So he suggested that innovation, whether artistic or otherwise, are often the result of social interactions and collective efforts of people who really come from different worlds. And innovation is often sparked by that kind of collision and sharing of knowledge. So I like to think of that idea as a kind of breeding of a collective intelligence. And it's by no means a new idea, but it's one that seems pretty urgent at the moment, and one that I think we should move towards, no matter what field we're in. So I thought we could look together at the notion of socius or collective intelligence through the lens of an artist, Jakob Kudsk Steenson, who I have the privilege of working with. Two artworks in particular of his. And if we could start the images, that would be great. And two of his many, many collaborators, Melanie Challenger and Okkyung Lee. So you'll see behind us images of worlds that Jakob creates, and we'll explain to you how they come to be. So Jakob, you're Danish?
Yes.
So you say. And you work in the realm of video games, virtual reality, sound installations, and immersive environments. And so while we can imagine Jakob sitting behind a computer screen quite a lot and doing a lot of coding, but that's only part of what he does. And you'll often find him exploring geothermal vents on a seabed. He does this himself. Foraging in boreal forests, mapping ice formations in the Arctic, studying mycelium and fungal communication, wading in mangrove swamps, and digging through the archives of natural history museums. So Jakob's work also intersects with a lot of the themes that we're seeing in the Triennale today, which of course is environmental catastrophe. So to be reductive, you build virtual worlds and speculative stories about overlooked natural phenomena and how they develop over time. And these are usually deployed, as you can see in these pictures, in large-scale environments, often in museums and in public spaces. And they're both, well, you can't really tell from these images, but they're visual, sonic, and haptic, and usually use very advanced technology. But one of the points I wanted to make is that you don't, and you in fact couldn't, do this alone. And your work is the result of multiple and sometimes unlikely collaborations with field biologists, philosophers, writers, dream scientists, composers, musicians, and many other species. And we have two of these collaborators here today. Welcome to you both. Okkyung, you're a celebrated cellist, composer, and as we saw yesterday, I don't know who saw and witnessed this, I know a few of us did, you over there did, you're an electrifying improviser and performer. I personally was blown away.
Oh, thank you.
You've collaborated with the likes of Laurie Anderson, Arca, Douglas Gordon, Arthur Jaffa, Christian Markley, Thurston Moore, and it goes on and on and on and on. And you collaborated with Jakob on a project called The Ephemeral Lake. And many of these images come from that work, which I think was first shown at the Hamburger Kunsthalle in 2004, 2003?
13, yeah.
13?
2013.
No. Okay, I got my numbers wrong. Welcome also to Melanie. You're a writer, a researcher, a broadcaster on environmental history, philosophy of science, and bioethics. You've written a number of remarkable books, and I now know that you're a year late on your new one.
Thank you, Martine.
And the past ones are On Extinction, How We Became Estranged from Nature in 2011, How to Be an Animal, What It Means to Be Human in 2021, Animal Dignity, Philosophical Reflections on Non-Human Existence in 2023. You're also Deputy Chair of the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, a Vice President of the RSPCA, co-founder of Animals in the Room, and it goes on and on and on. So it's a real privilege to be with you here. And you worked with Jakob on another project, which is called Psychosphere, which is currently on view in Cisternine. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Yeah.
Cisternine, which is a huge repurposed underground reservoir in Copenhagen. And I really urge you to go and see it. So let's talk about these collaborations. Why don't you tell us more about the origins of your work, your medium, your working methods, and your approach to collaborations?
Yeah, so for the past 10 years, I worked as an artist pretty much exclusively going to natural environments, and then I would spend weeks or a few months at a time. And then I would build a virtual landscape because I grew up modifying video games, and I had an early career like modding virtual worlds and publishing them online from actually since I was a teenager. This is like 20 years ago. So for 20 years, I've just come to know virtual world building as a very, almost like musical, improvisational tool. It comes very natural to me. So everything we see now is like images from different worlds, but they're each based on actual field work I've done with, on my own or with researchers and different biologists. So for example, this artwork Psychosphere that I collaborated with Melanie on, that's right now at the Cisterns in Denmark, I went myself and with an Italian diver and filmed inside of the top of some underwater volcanic vents, but I also worked with a research vessel from Norway and Trondheim over the summer. And we see some images of this now that mapped a newly discovered Arctic deep sea volcanic landscape that's never been seen before. So it's kind of like a whole new visual world that's currently being mapped of underwater volcanoes. But in my work, once I've built out the core of it, the kind of poetry of a mood, a psychology, or a core story in the virtual landscape, then I invite in other collaborators to respond to that freely, like Okkyung, or I worked with Arca before, Marco Riesman, like different musicians, also poets, writers. Sometimes it ends in books, in games, in exhibitions, and it kind of unfolds from there. But the poetic and an environmental core is very close to my own body of going through these environments at first, and then slowly other people are entering this process. And so with Okkyung we worked together with music, or Okkyung made music for this piece, The Ephemeral Lake, that was shown at the Kunsthalle in Hamburg a few years ago. And with Melanie, actually the collaborative process was much more like integral right from the beginning. Because she told me about this funky concept called a psychosphere, which I took as a perspective on evolution that doesn't think about intelligence, a kind of language, which we're thinking a lot about now, in particular in relationship with technology, but something that deals with the evolution of psyche between species, and something that starts with matter and vibration. And then I took that to my perspective on the deep sea, of the origins of life in the deep sea, and how psyche, our psyche, or the species psyche, comes from friction and matter and not from like thought. So then that changed an entire design process, and I worked on an accordion player, Bjarke, some fabricators. There's lots of elements to this. But that's like the baseline that, we can...
And so as you come from such different worlds, I mean, how do these collaborations work? Where do you begin?
So it's a kind of back and forth process at first between, usually I look at an environment quite removed from the outside.
Yeah.
I research it, or like Melanie tells me about some science behind the place. And, I look at the world like a lot of people today look at it, which is like from a satellite, from research, from stories. But then I go to the place, and then over time, I kind of pack my mind with ideas and knowledge, and then I try to lose it through a very corporal process. And in the end, I kind of see pictures or feel things that go way beyond anything I could imagine from afar. And so there's kind of a meeting between almost this satellite meta worldview that I think most of us have today. We experience the world through phones or stories, very two-dimensional. And then, that creates like a core. And then inside of that, I literally, for example, with Okkyung, it's like I wrote like a little particular brief or story about the project to invite a collaborator in, so that Okkyung could feel, I hope, personal, invited into that world. So I don't like direct people, I tell them what to do. It's more like, I think of it as that's the environment, and I build the environment, put it in an exhibition, the audience enters that, but there's a step in between, which are other collaborators that enter that world. And the material that I receive back, I then modify the work to again. So there's a price of life in it, because that's kind of how the natural world works. It's like, it is kind of chaos. It is like very messy or full of all these fabrics and textures.
Okkyung, do you want to speak to that, to your experience of working on Ephemeral Lake with Jakob?
Yeah, and first of all, we also have to acknowledge Lou O'Neill, who's been a collaborator with Jakob for a long time. And I think with his help, this project really came together really nicely. We kind of met totally by chance, and it started with me going to this exhibition in Berlin in 2021.
21, yeah.
Yeah, called the Berber. And the only reason I went was because the Arca did the music for it. And when I entered the space, I felt this like one of those like moments that you feel like you're stepping into a totally different reality almost, which was really fascinating. And the artwork was also very inspiring and also very different. I mean, I'm not really used to this virtual reality or game space. So it was really interesting experience, and it was like really beautiful. So it left me quite a big impression. And 2 years later, he just happened to be in this residency in Switzerland, and we just met by chance. And he didn't know who I was, and I didn't realize that was the same artist. And only the next day, Lou, his collaborator, who recognized me, so we talked, and we had a casual meeting, and in Berlin maybe half a year later, 1 year later, and this conversation was really great because he mentioned two things that was really kind of really like just like small words, but kind of unlocked something. One was that as a creator, like Jakob, he just creates this door that let people come in. And once the door is open and people walk in to that space, he can do whatever he wants. All the freedom of creativity, which was a really exciting way of thinking about it. And then also he mentioned, which was really shocking, that he said, these days people don't listen to music like as a music, but like lots of people are experiencing music on the game, and then it's not a linear composition. Mm-hmm. It's something different, which was totally different. I mean, new to me too, because I'm more of a traditional music maker in that sense. So that was really intriguing. So I said that I'd like to be a part of it because it sounded so fun and different and exciting.
And Melanie, where did you two meet?
Yeah, well, we had, in some ways, it kind of speaks to the wider themes because the way that we kind of met one another was, so I actually started in the creative arts myself. So I began as a poet. I continued to work as a librettist in classical music. But that kind of dominant area of my work since has been more theoretical, so within history of ideas in philosophy, more in kind of non-fiction, and also as an ethicist. And what was interesting for me already was that before I met Jakob, in the kind of year or two beforehand, again, in terms of the themes of this festival, so I work as an ethicist, and part of that work since has been about building a project called Animals in the Room, which is about expanding democracy to bring in the voices of other species. Because, we talk about inequalities, right? But there's 4% of wild mammals left on this earth. 70% of the wild mammals in biomass terms on this planet are stuck in our food systems. So they're not living free, autonomous lives. So we have huge quantities of inequality that take place within the living world, non-human world. I was designing this project to try and expand our democracies, to bring them into the space and change the way that we make decisions in the world moving forward, which kind of speaks to everything that's here today. But I was coming into that theoretically, and actually we came up against an imaginative challenge. Because how do you bring corals into this room today, for example? How do we bring giant salamanders into this room today? How do we bring sequoias into this room, right? Who's figuring that challenge out? It's artists. Mm-hmm. So I was looking around for artists who might be doing that kind of work. And how did it happen? Because you were already doing work. So, I think sometimes we break apart from our kind of two cultures, right? Of the kind of arts and sciences. But very often today, the challenge is cut across those. And we find that people separately are doing work that is bringing the arts and sciences back together. And that is our story in many ways, isn't it? Because I was moving back from arts into science and theory, back into arts again. I was going on that journey. Jakob is meeting those challenges separately himself. And we kind of just met in this really organic way, didn't we? You'd already been doing some... You'll be able to remind me better than me, but you were already doing work kind of that was responding to on extinction, right?
Yeah.
And then I was looking for artists, and people were like, oh, Jakob's name was coming up, and then tell me what happened next.
I mean, I think there's kind of two things, because there's like the science and the perspective, and then the emotional vibration of like Okkyung's cello in an artwork. So with Melanie, you wrote this book on extinction that took a very poetic and personal approach to the theme of extinction through like learning to remember the names of flowers, for example. And I was doing a project at the Serpentine Galleries then called The Deep Listener, and I was reading this book in 2019, and then it came together for me in making something that felt more close to you rather than really afar. Yeah. And so it changed me a lot in how I design, because when you do these big collaborations, you have to design, you have to make decisions, you have to write a story, you have to create something that other people can enter as they are, but also within that relative context, so it doesn't just spill out and doesn't become something greater than any one person can imagine. But then, for example, that book really changed my approach to making art, to making it environmental and way more intimate and close to my body, and respecting and trying to give that to the audience. And then for this work, Psychosphere, it's like we did a talk together in 2022, and you told me about this concept of Psychosphere.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Exactly, and then that now becomes this big show. I mean, it's 4,600 square meters underground in Copenhagen, in this water reservoir. It's a huge show and production and everything, but it builds around a single concept of a psychosphere. I want to build a psychosphere. What does that mean? And follow every principle you told me about scientifically, and create an entire project around it.
Can you talk to us more about what a psychosphere is?
Yeah, sorry. So So that's right. Jakob originally responded to that work, and we kind of, when we started talking, we realized we had so much in common. And I told him about the new work that I was doing. So that I'm working on a second book at the moment called Life is an Act of Rebellion. And that's about rethinking. At the moment, when we think about the living world, we tend to approach at particular ecological scales. And because of the kind of I mean, not to go into the history of science here, but, you know, we have Vernadsky and we have Arthur Tansley, who gave us the ecosystem idea and the biosphere idea. This is really looking at the ecological scale in terms of the interconnections between organisms, kind of, you know, shaping that the world is made by the interactions of many entities together. It was an incredibly useful way of explaining the world because it enabled us to basically model things, you know, and explain things in a very functional, system-based way. But what it left out was the organism. And that always struck me as curious. So I wanted to go back to what's odd about life. What's odd about life is that we do things for reasons. We're purposeful. Every single entity that you look at is purposeful. If you go into the genetic story of this, it will tell you, everything's a machine. You'll see this out here. Everything's like a machine. Actually, no, life is not like a machine. Life is, in fact, nothing like a machine. It's not, you know, the ecosystem isn't just parts that will do functions. Organisms are also not parts, made up of little parts that do something that they're just programmed to do. They have a psyche in them. So this is a really ancient Greek idea coming from Aristotle primarily, that actually we are bodies that are ensouled with something that is purposive, that we can only be seen as a body, that life cannot be separated into any kind of dualism, that life is an embodied, purposeful, remarkable thing. And psyche is this old idea. It's the best idea we have to explain what life is. So I wanted to go back and say, well, if we understand life from psyche, do we have a biosphere? Do we have an ecosphere? Should we be seeing things in this kind of way, or should we be starting from the interactions between different agents and agencies? And what does life look like if you build a psychosphere that comes from, that really trusts that when you look at an organism, you are looking at an intelligent agent that has a purpose. And when you look at the world that we've created, you see a world that is a tapestry of different intelligences that have created a world of meaning. So that is what the psychosphere is. And I completely trusted Jakob because he's brilliant and the arts speak a different language. And I'd
like to say that it speaks to his ambition, because that is quite something to manifest what you've just described.
Yeah. And I think it would also be nice to hear, Okkyung, your experience of working on the ephemeral lake as well, because so then there's like psychosphere, which builds on this philosophy, but then for the other project called the ephemeral lake, it was built on a concept called orogeny. So this is the scientific term for volcanic vibrations that create mountains. And the other project that we saw earlier on the screen was based on these rock formations that come out of the ground, and that's based on scientists I talked to that literally listen. I mean, the way you measure if earthquakes and everything is that you kind of listen to the heartbeat of the planet, of continents moving. And this was the foundation for what I thought about when I invited you, Okkyung, with these like this virtual world and glass lamps that react to the cello. And we talked about the cello as like vibration.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting hearing for you as an artist, because for me as an artist, this is the most interesting point. It's actually when another artist somehow enters that, and it's out of my realm.
Yes.
So what was that like?
Well, the thing is, I spent the last 2.5 decades developing my own language on cello, and I feel like I've done it, I've gone to many different directions, but then vibration being one of the most like fundamental element of sound itself. It actually really wanted to go back and then dig deeper, and then even like really like let's really listen to the smallest details, and then really like allow me dig deeper again. And also because all of my sounds are only generated by the instrument with the strings that vibrates against this wood. And it also, because you work with a digital world, so it kind of let me push that boundary at this time. So I until working with you, I kind of refused to work like with using a digital manipulation. But this time it kind of like let me open that door. So I took my sounds and then kind of went all the way. And then, it brought me some amazing results. And then actually some of the sounds that I used in the track yesterday was the sounds that I made for the ephemeral lake. So it's kind of, allowed me to go into different directions and vibration. And then also like when I actually went to the exhibition in Hamburger Kunsthalle, that was such a great experience because it's a sound, but then also translate into actual physical installation, and then also because it was installed in 2 different locations, 2 stories, and then just the fact that it was kind of relating to the architecture, the space of it, and then also the feeling of like being high and then being low, and then also this like beautiful glass sculpture that you had with the lights. And then everything was so beautifully integrated. And then just the sound became just one element, but also something that was holding it all together, vibration. So that was great. I mean, it was a really just exciting experience for me.
I think
in the middle of it,
One of the things I find with, I actually found it even just here, is that the music, if it's attached into an artwork or embedded in an artwork, is what often invites you in, isn't it? I found that there was a piece out there that, and as you say, that's such an embodied experience because you were called towards that artwork from quite a distance away, actually. It's a real amplifier, but it's also the journey that we go on. It physically connects us, obviously, to the art.
We were hoping to be able to play you some of this, but wonder if we still
sound
could.
video, or
Anyway, technical issues. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was just joining in because I just, commenting because it is, music does often draw me towards an artwork first. It's effective.
Well, particularly if you have a kind of part of your sensibility is also artistic, poetic, and musical.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think, it's just we're animals, right? And so we focus very much on the visual. So if there's something that's visually arresting, it'll dominate in a room. But equally well, sound is something that our bodies are receptive to at a much greater distance. So in fact, sound will get your curiosity going before you've even thought about it.
Yes.
It's not a rational experience. It's just a calling that will take you, from quite a distance in. So,
but then with that installation, the sound also became kind of physical experience too, because it's vibration, and you really felt the vibration when you're surrounded with the installation. So it was really like a multi-sensory experience, and then also that's something that, as a composer, that is not something I get to work with that often. So it was good to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's kind of like to kind of try to tie it together too, of making this into artworks and exhibitions. It's sort of like making this strange whirlpool of different. There's a physical museum. We're in one. Okay. Then there's a virtual space. The virtual space is actually kind of a coordinate system that moves over time as you interact with it. So for every artwork I do, now we see the images that you see on screens in the work, but the sound is kind of what brings the invisible virtual world to you, because when you deal with ecosystems, there are a lot of things you can't see in environment. So, okay, you can see it digitally. You can make this what we see now is like a tiny rock in nature, but then I enlarge it like 200 times, so you get a sense of scale. But the virtual is actually, it only has meaning when we give it meaning. So when we create a screen, then you can see into it. But if you remove the screen, you can still hear a coordinate system. So with this other collaborator, Lou of mine, and there's also a programmer, Walter Waynants, it's like a whole team of people I work with. This virtual world and its sound occupies a hyper-spatialized system in architecture, where we use all the natural echoes. Like you can go like, and there's like a 4-second echo you can hear in the corners of the space here. Or when you tune an instrument, you know this. So a lot of the virtual experience, I work so much with sound because it can really, even when you don't look at the images of the screen, you can still feel it.
Yeah.
And then there's vibration moving through your body. So it's sort of this strange combination of like a mind and emotion, an actual landscape, a technology, a world, that virtual world that's created that other people enter, and then the final thing that an audience enters. But the result, I can never fully predict in the beginning. And that's why like I also in the process try to bring like people together who may not have met each other before and work in different disciplines. And I kind of conjure this little door for them to enter. And this is actually a video game philosophy where it comes from old horror video games. So the really old ones from the 90s, the first thing you see in them is a very realistic door. The first thing in a game you see is something super familiar. You choose as a player to open that door. Once you've done that, you can throw a completely new worldview of someone. But if you don't provide the door, if people are not familiar with the subject of your exhibition or artwork, they might remain protective. But if they choose to kind of do something and open, then there's this philosophy that you can throw whatever at someone. And so also in exhibition designs and work with institutions, I kind of try to do this. There's always like a liminal space before the exhibition. That's kind of an intro welcoming that brings you in. And that extends then to how other people would enter the work, and it's kind of this open playground in a way.
So I can see that, I can feel that we could speak about this for a very, very long time. We're going to carry on outside, and I can also see that we're running out of time. So, but I'm compelled to ask you, you all, but particularly you, Jakob, now that you've achieved something as extraordinary as your exhibition now in Copenhagen, what's the next frontier?
Well, one thing is to keep expanding these worlds and also have performers like Okkyung enter these exhibitions and make like living instruments that there are musicians inside of. But the other thing is that I've been working on turning this into a video game with like where all these worlds become levels in it, and then working with a big video game publisher like Epic to bring it to like millions of people. So now I have this new kind of vision of taking these worlds and these new philosophies of life, these very raw emotional musical elements, fuse them together and bring it into a more like a mainstream video game, but aimed at not an audience in a museum, but a very different group who will then maybe for the first time experience this kind of approach to making art, to experience music, to experience environments, and give that to the world, to work on that. Yeah.
And do you have a sense that there is a kind of younger generation, let's say, call it the gaming world, that has that they have an appetite for this sort of relatively complex storytelling?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there's a growing genre in video games of titles that are not the biggest productions, but just one level below. So they're fairly large, and you aim at like 1 million sales, but not like the massive Hollywood productions, because games today can be like 300 million to produce, but that's not what we're talking about. It's not something completely at the scale of what I'm already doing in exhibitions, something in between. And there's a growing interest in this. So for example, like the world's top classical music track right now is from a new video game that came out of France called Clair Obscur 23, which is this strange, surreal, novel take on Paris and the future. It's very poetic, it's very beautiful, and it's become like the biggest selling game right now, and it is heavily based on classical music. And it brings suddenly that entire audience to listen to classical music. The themes is very philosophical, based on old surreal paintings and things. And so there's a growing appetite for these things now, a bit like that's been art films, kind of how they followed mainstream tale of, like the early Hollywood productions. That's happening now with digital publication and games as well. So I feel like it's a good moment to do this. And some of my work are already available as short games people can already download. And a lot of the people that write me and the studio and things are quite young. It's like university students, a lot that also very attached to this work.
So we unfortunately are running out of time, but please don't hesitate to come and talk to any of us afterwards. Just one tiny bit of time to ask, and if there's any questions from the audience, if there's anything you'd like to ask any of our speakers. No. Well, come and talk to us afterwards, and thank you so much for accepting this invitation, for coming to speak with Jakob. It's a great pleasure.